When people hear the name Vlad the Impaler, they often think of the figure who inspired the legend of Dracula. A cruel prince, a shadowy ruler, a man whose reign dripped with blood and terror. But behind the myths lies a historical figure whose brutality was very real and far more terrifying than most of the stories told in fiction. Vlad the Impaler was not a vampire. He was a man of flesh and blood who turned cruelty into a weapon of politics and survival. His enemies feared him not just because he was ruthless in battle, but because the punishments he inflicted went beyond imagination. The way he treated those who crossed him still stands today as one of history's darkest chapters. Vlad ruled Wallachia, a small but strategic region caught between two powerful enemies, the Kingdom of Hungary to the north and the mighty Ottoman Empire to the south. His homeland was constantly threatened, and survival required not just strength, but fear. Vlad understood that to keep his throne, he could not appear weak. He had to terrify both his enemies and his own people into obedience. So he built his rule on a foundation of cruelty, turning his punishments into spectacles that echoed across Europe. The most infamous method he used was, of course, impalement. It was not a quick or simple execution. It was designed to prolong suffering and to send a message. Victims were stripped, a sharpened wooden stake was forced through the body, and then the person was raised upright so that the stake anchored in the ground. Depending on how the stake was placed, the victim could live for hours, sometimes even days, in unimaginable agony. The victim's screams carried across the fields, while the sight of writhing bodies, slowly dying, broke the will of all who saw it. This was not punishment for justice. It was punishment for fear, a method of control through terror. But Vlad did not use impalement sparingly. He used it on a massive scale. One of the most shocking stories is the so-called Forest of the Impaled. After defeating an invading Ottoman army, Vlad ordered the execution of thousands of captured soldiers. Instead of killing them swiftly, he had them impaled and arranged in rows that stretched for miles. When the next Ottoman army marched into Wallachia, they found this ghastly sight waiting for them. Tens of thousands of rotting bodies swaying on stakes, vultures circling overhead, the stench of death poisoning the air. The invading soldiers were so horrified that many turned back before battle even began. Vlad had created not just an execution ground, but a wall of fear. Impalement was his signature, but it was not his only method. Vlad also employed mutilation as punishment. Thieves, spies, and traitors were often dismembered, their hands, noses, or ears cut off before they were executed. He believed that harsh punishment was the only way to enforce order. If a soldier stole from the poor, Vlad made an example of him. If a noble betrayed him, the noble suffered a death worse than any common criminal. He believed fear was the only path to loyalty, and he enforced it with merciless consistency. Vlad also used deception and cruelty as tools of strategy. In one infamous incident, he invited hundreds of noble families who had once betrayed his father to a feast. The tables were filled with food and wine. The guests relaxed, and then Vlad turned the celebration into a massacre. Some nobles were impaled immediately. Others were forced into hard labor until they collapsed. In a single night, he eliminated entire rival families. It was not just revenge. It was a message betrayal would never be forgiven. Foreign envoys and dignitaries were not spared either. When Ottoman ambassadors once refused to remove their turbans in his court, saying it was their custom never to take them off, Vlad reportedly had their turbans nailed to their heads. He turned diplomacy into brutality, making sure no visitor ever forgot that in his land, defiance came with pain. Cruelty extended to civilians as well. Vlad was obsessed with control, and he demanded honesty from his subjects. To prove that his people feared him enough to obey, he placed a golden cup in the center of a public fountain. In most lands, such treasure would vanish in minutes. But under Vlad's rule, the cup remained untouched. People were too terrified to steal it because they knew the punishment would not be prison or a fine. It would be torture and death. His cruelty created order, but but at the cost of freedom and humanity. Even war itself became an arena for his inhuman acts. During battles against the Ottomans, Vlad used scorched earth tactics. He poisoned wells, burned villages, and slaughtered not only soldiers, but also civilians, leaving nothing behind for the advancing armies. His goal was not only to defeat his enemies, but also to terrify them into never returning. The Ottomans called him a demon, a monster who fought with fire and fear rather than armies alone. And in many ways, his strategy worked. One of the most disturbing accounts describes how Vlad once captured a group of foreign merchants who defied his laws. Instead of executing them outright, he ordered them boiled alive. In other cases, prisoners were skinned, buried alive, or forced to watch their families die before their own deaths. The variety of punishments shows that cruelty for Vlad was not random. It was calculated. He knew that fear spread faster when it was unpredictable, when no one could be sure what form of horror awaited them. And yet, here is the chilling truth. For all his cruelty, many of his people respected him. To them, he was not a monster. He was a protector. Wallachia was a land threatened by larger, richer empires, and Vlad's brutality kept those empires at bay. Ordinary peasants saw in him a ruler who punished thieves, crushed enemies, and kept the land safe. The very methods that horrified outsiders made him a figure of order at home. His cruelty was the shield that protected them, even if it was also the sword that cut them down. Foreign rulers, however, painted him as a devil. The Germans printed pamphlets describing his cruelty in graphic detail, spreading stories of impalements and mass killings. To them, Vlad was not a hero. He was a savage, a barbarian who proved that Eastern Europe was a land of monsters. Some of these stories may have been exaggerated, but the core truth was undeniable. Vlad used terror on a scale that shocked even his violent age. The question remains, was he mad with cruelty, or was he simply a ruler shaped by the brutal times in which he lived? Wallachia was surrounded by enemies. Treachery was constant, betrayal was common, and survival required strength. Perhaps Vlad believed that only fear could maintain order, and only horror could protect his land. His cruelty was both his strategy and his legacy. Centuries later, his name was transformed into the legend of Dracula, a vampire who fed on blood. But the truth is that Vlad the Impaler did not need fiction to be terrifying. His real actions were enough to freeze the blood of his enemies. He turned impalement into his signature, built forests of the dead, mutilated traitors, humiliated diplomats, and created a world where even the thought of disobedience brought nightmares. He proved that fear could be as powerful as any army, and that cruelty could become a throne's foundation. But history also shows the cost. His reign left his land scarred, his enemies united against him, and his name forever cursed. Vlad may have defended Wallachia, but he did so at a price that cannot be forgotten. His enemies remembered him not only as a ruler, but also as a monster whose punishments went too far. His story is a reminder that cruelty may build power, but it cannot build peace. The legacy of Vlad the Impaler is not only in the tales of Dracula, it is in the warning that comes from unchecked brutality. He showed the world that fear can hold a land together, but fear alone cannot save it forever. The forests of impaled victims may have terrified armies, but they also made him hated by the very powers he needed as allies. In the end, his cruelty ensured his name would be remembered, but remembered as a symbol of horror. And that is the true story. Vlad was not a creature of myth. He was worse because he was real. He was not immortal, but his cruelty has lived for centuries, whispered in fear and fascination. The man who ruled through impalement showed the world how far human cruelty can go when power is unchecked, and how terror can outlive even the cruelest ruler.